This is definitely the best way to start a camera comparison. Cup of tea in hand, sat on the sofa at home, mainly because it's a miserable day outside. But we've got brand new, just unveiled Oppo Find X3 Pro versus the S21 Ultra, that's the Snapdragon variant. And hopefully, fingers crossed, by the end of the video, you'll have a good idea of which phone has the best camera. So this is a quick side-by-side video test, but I really want to kick this video off with the Fred test. So this is Fred the cat. He hates having his picture taken, or at least maybe he doesn't like having phones shoved in his face. But getting a good still photo of this cat is extremely difficult. But one of the features of the Find X3 Pro, according to Oppo, is its faster shutter speed and its ability to take photos that aren't a blurry mess when the phone is shaking or you've got a cat trying to get away from you. And actually, it does make a difference. Of the 13 side-by-side photos I shot with each phone, 11 were in reasonable focus on the Oppo versus only 4 on the S21. I mean, anyone with a child or a pet knows how important being able to take a photo of a fast-moving target in focus can be. So points to Oppo. Now, quick disclaimer, I'm not a professional photographer. I have been described as blind as a bat by a comment in a previous comparison, so you don't have to agree with me, and I'd love to hear which phone you think comes out on top in the comments. But spoiler alert, you really can't go wrong with either. So both phones have the ultra-wide, the main, and the telephoto, with a 2x optical zoom on the Oppo, and both 3x and 10x optical zooms on the S21 Ultra. And at 30x, the S21 is still just about usable. Although at 100x, well, neither look great, but the S21 is clearly the long-range zoom champion. But most of the time you'll be using closer zooms, so this is shot with their respective 2 and 3x opticals, but the Oppo looks oddly flat here, both the swan's feathers and the water, so the S21 is a lot more detailed, and even more so when we zoom in further to 10x. But then at the other end of the spectrum, the ultra-wide lens also doubles as a macro, and they both look great actually, albeit with a slightly different field of view. Here's another example, firstly using the main lens, and then close up with the ultra-wide, which automatically switches to macro. Now, a big selling point of the Find X3 Pro's camera is the fact that both the main and the ultra-wide are exactly the same. So as I switch between them, on paper at least, we shouldn't see that much difference. Although here we can see the ultra-wide is a lot brighter, and so the colors also shift a fair bit. But this is a much better example of it working well, although neither phone drastically changes between the lenses. If we crop in by 300% from the main lens, the photos look remarkably similar in terms of detail, with the only difference really being a slightly more saturated tone on the Oppo. It is usually Samsung's phones that we talk about as looking more vibrant or oversaturated, but the Oppo takes it a step further, and here it is certainly more eye-catching. Close up, still with the main lens, not the macro, and the detail is incredible on both. So far, the slightly oversaturated Oppo hasn't been a problem, but quite simply, that phone box did not have any of the pinkish tones to it, and that grass, or is it the weeds around the bottom, looks unnaturally green. The S21 just looks more realistic here. But aside from the color tone difference, we are seeing a pattern of the Oppo having brighter shadows, so in the entrance at the bottom right here, you can see a little bit more detail inside than on the S21. Now it's funny because when I first saw these side by side, I immediately thought, oh, I like the S21's shots more, but then my wife Sarah looked and said she liked the Oppo as it was less contrasty and a little bit more flattering. And we're seeing this pattern of a brighter image on the Oppo and a slightly more contrasty and shadow-heavy look on the S21. This is another great example of the pattern we're seeing. Just look how dark the shadow I'm casting on the wall to my left is on both, but while the lighter shadows on the Oppo do look more realistic, the downside of the brighter image is my forehead and my face are a bit overexposed and blown out. It's the same here. The S21 handles the dynamic range better by softening the highlights on her face and giving us a more natural look. Okay, let's switch gears, or at least turn the lights down, and holy moly, the Oppo's white balance is way off with this one. And again, the S21's dynamic range is doing a better job at evening out the light strip behind my desk. Now, same photo, but with the ultra-wide lens, and despite Oppo's claims of uniformity between the two lenses, this photo does not look the same. It actually looks better, although for dynamic range and white balance, I'm still giving it to the S21. Here's another ultra-wide night mode shot, and they both look great. And the colors are much more realistic on the Oppo this time. But despite the overly contrasty tone of the S21, we are getting a more even exposure overall, from the picture frame at the top right to the lampshade at the top left. However, I did note that while doing these night mode tests, the Oppo was much faster. It took the S21 several seconds longer each time. And in extreme low light, literally it's just the candles here, they're very similar, but the S21's a touch brighter, and if you look at the wall in particular, there is less noise. For this one, I actually had to look away from the phones just to confirm what I was seeing in real life, as these look so different, and it was much closer to the S21. Its white balance is hard to beat. Let's switch to the front camera, and they both let you use night mode for selfies, which is great, but here the Oppo looks a lot nicer. You've almost got like an iPhone look to its brighter and flatter photos. Now I think I took this at about 1 AM, so it was definitely past my bedtime. The S21 is clearly the more detailed shot, but it also looks over-sharpened and it's not very aesthetically pleasing, although maybe that's just my face. Okay, that's better. In good light, we're seeing the S21 handle the highlights on our faces better than the Oppo, where it looks slightly blown out. We're definitely seeing this pattern of Samsung selfies leaning towards a warmer yellowy tone, whereas the Oppo has pinkier reddish hues. You can see more texture in our faces on the S21, but if I was going to post one of these straight away on Instagram, I'd pick the Oppo. And here the Samsung does seem to be struggling with the lighting. It's much darker and far too yellow. Okay, last photo of me, I promise. This is a portrait selfie, and you really can't go wrong with either when you have good lighting. Switching back to video again, and in low light, while it's taking ages for the Oppo to correctly re-expose here, but throughout the S21 is a fair bit brighter, although the Oppo is noticeably more detailed, particularly if you look at fine text and when we get close up to these flowers. Now let me show you how they compare during the day, and if we go through the different lenses while recording, the S21 can zoom in further, but then at the expense of stabilization. But then, when we pan up to the clouds, you can see the S21 is doing a better job at reducing the blown out highlights, so you can see a lot more detail in the cloud, although switching to the ultra-wide and it's not quite as effective, but it's much closer to the Oppo. However, one thing that did surprise me is the Find X3 Pro doesn't seem to be able to shoot 8K video. Maybe this is because it's pre-release software, but there just simply isn't an option for 8K on the Oppo at the moment. So that's a lot to take in, and of course they do each have their own unique features. The S21 has single take and the director's view modes, while the Find X3 Pro can shoot 10-bit RAW photos and then also view them back natively on the 10-bit screen. Although these HEIF files are difficult to edit and share. But I think if I absolutely had to pick a winner, and this is just my opinion of course, I would go with the Galaxy S21 Ultra. It's just a bit more versatile, offers better dynamic range, and night mode shots with the more natural white balance. However, the over-sharpening can look unnatural sometimes, and on the whole, I do prefer the selfie camera on the Oppo. But I think its biggest selling point is the faster shutter speed. Don't forget it wiped the floor with the S21 in the Fred test, and that alone might be a good enough reason to go for the Find X3 Pro. But what about you? Which phone do you think has the best camera? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video and would like me to make more camera comparisons, then give me a thumbs up, tap that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time right here on the Tech Chap.